On Friday, there was finally some justice against Monsanto, one of the most unethical and frankly disgusting corporations in this entire world. Monsanto was recently bought by Bayer Pharmaceuticals, which I covered here on this channel when it did happen because it was scary news. The Trump Justice Department approved the merger back in April despite heavy pushback from the farmers' unions in the United States. Trump is supposedly for farmers, but beyond the effect that it had and would have on working farmers in the country, it was also disastrous because it would allow for a more widespread acceptance of Monsanto's products, which for years we've been hearing terrifying things about. But as I mentioned earlier, there was finally some justice with a wrinkle that I'll get to later in the story. Bayer stock slumped more than 10% in trading Monday, 3 days after a California jury awarded $289 million to a former groundskeeper who said the popular weed killer Roundup gave him terminal cancer. The groundskeeper in Friday's verdict, Dwayne Johnson, was the first to have his case go to trial after doctors pushed for it because he was close to death. Johnson's attorney said that his client used Roundup 20 to 30 times a year between mid-2012 and early 2016 while working for a school district outside San Francisco. He was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in 2014. Timothy Litzenberg, one of Johnson's attorneys, told the Post that Johnson contacted Monsanto after the diagnosis to say that he had been exposed to Roundup and wanted to know if there was any correlation between the weed killer and cancer. He was told there were no ties to Roundup and his cancer, and he continued to use the herbicide. Now, lesions cover up to 80% of his body. Litzenberg said his firm is representing 2,000 people in their claims against Monsanto and that there are probably 5,000 cases across the country. Johnson is unlikely to live past 2020. And as the Post article alluded to, there are many more cases in the pipeline because Roundup was the world's most popular weed killer. And it is still being used in some areas despite the World Health Organization announcing in 2015 that glyphosate, the herbicide in Roundup, was likely causing cancer in humans. But despite this, it is still the official position of the EPA and the U.S. National Institutes of Health that glyphosate does not cause cancer at all. Our regulatory agencies are a joke. They aren't a joke for corporations, they're a joke for you and me because they don't regulate enough as is, or they didn't, and then Trump and his cronies are dismantling regulatory agencies even further. Testimony and evidence presented at trial showed that the warning signs seen in scientific research dated back to the early 1980s and have only increased over the decades. But with each new study showing harm, Monsanto worked not to warn users or redesign its products, but to create its own science to show they were safe. The company often pushed its version of science into the public realm through ghostwritten work that was designed to appear independent and thus more credible. Evidence was also presented to jurors showing how closely the company had worked with Environmental Protection Agency officials to promote the safety message and suppress evidence of harm. Closely worked with is one way of putting it. Pretty much bribing them is another. According to Follow the Money, Monsanto has given over $30 million, an overwhelming majority of which has not gone to any specific party, although they donated more to Republicans. It's spread all over. And they have also reportedly spent over $2.7 million in lobbying over the past 16 years. Seems to have worked, but they can't suppress this information forever. Another trial is set to take place in October in St. Louis, and roughly 4,000 plaintiffs have claims pending with the potential outcomes resulting in many more hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in damage awards. They all allege not only that their cancers were caused by exposure to Monsanto's herbicides, but that Monsanto has long known about and covered up the dangers. Monsanto maintains it has done nothing wrong and that the evidence has been misrepresented. But when it comes to Dwayne Johnson, despite this astronomical number, he may not even live to see justice, which is just another cruel wrinkle to this. Monsanto's attorneys say they have the bulk of scientific research firmly on their side, unlikely, and that they will appeal against the verdict, meaning it could be years before Johnson and his family see a dime of the damage award. In the meantime, his wife, Araceli, works 2 jobs to support the couple and their 2 young sons as Johnson prepares for another round of chemotherapy. Is there a starker example of injustice in America than that paragraph? This giant corporation, Monsanto, likely knowingly suppresses information about their product causing cancer and basically pays off the government to do nothing about it. Then when the little guy gets cancer and the judicial system actually backs up his claim to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, he may not even get the money before he dies. And while he sues the company, his wife is working 2 jobs. This is America. And one more point, how obvious does the corruption have to be? 3 years ago, the World Health Organization declared that the weed killer, the most popular weed killer in America, was a carcinogen, that it was causing cancer. And crickets from the EPA, under Obama, under Trump, no, Roundup is totally fine. Let's keep pretending the US is a democracy because it's really doing us so much good.